अपनी 1 इंच जमीन भी किसी और को नहीं लेने देंगे।
Hello and welcome. On a Thursday morning, we have an important news and important statement made by Defense Minister Rajnath Singh in Parliament. You just heard him saying, "हम 1 इंच भी जमीन अपनी लेने नहीं देंगे." That was a comprehensive statement on the disengagement process that has began in Ladakh on Wednesday. As we know, the Chinese Defense Ministry had made out that statement, but India has made out an important statement this morning. The Defense Minister of India, Rajnath Singh, has made that statement. And to discuss the way forward and the steps of disengagement, I have with me our usual friend and China specialist, China expert, Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, who will take us through salient points of the agreement that has been arrived at between India and China, according to the statements that have been issued both by China and India. But before that, I just want to highlight some of the salient points of that statement by Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, where he talks about the disengagement on both north and south bank of Pangong having begun. If we can have that set of graphic up on this screen, this is what the main points of the agreement are. That status quo ante on north and south bank of Pangong Lake or Pangong will be restored. Both sides will cease from patrolling the area between Finger 3 and Finger 8. Chinese side will go back to having a presence east of Finger 8, which is their Sirija base, which will show you a map very quickly after this. Indian troops will be confined to Finger 3, which is the Dhan Singh Thapa post near Finger 3. And until an agreement is reached, there will be no patrolling by either side between the areas of Finger 3 and Finger 8 is what the salient points are. Similar thing has happened about the South Bank, where India had gained a tactical advantage in end of August last year, when it had taken up the positions on the heights of Chushul area, Rizangla and Richinla. So temporary moratorium on military activities has been put on. Patrolling will resume only after military and diplomatic talks take place. More importantly, all the semi-permanent structures that were built on either side of the Pangong Lake between Finger 3 and Finger 8 and also on the south bank will be removed, and the landforms will be restored, is what Defense Minister Rajnath Singh's statement states very clearly in Parliament. So these are the ones, and they have also spoken about other disputes or other points of disagreement, like Depsang and even maybe somewhere down near Demchok and Chumur. Those areas discussion will be done later. So, Mr. Ranade, welcome to this program, first of all, and your first reaction to the statement from either side, but of course also the Defense Minister's statement in Parliament this morning.
Good morning. Well, the first thing I would like to say, I would like to highlight, in fact, is that this is a temporary and first step. So, to my mind, it is a first step intended to ensure or reduce chances of any conflict breaking out in this area, where the troops are virtually eyeball to eyeball, they're so close to each other. Second, going by Defense Minister Rajnath's statement, I personally feel that it is a comprehensive statement, and he makes a couple of points very clear, indicating that India's position has not really changed. He reiterates that any disruption or disturbance of peace and tranquility along the LAC and the borders will affect bilateral relations, contrary to the Chinese repeated assertions that economic interaction and the border dispute should be kept separate. So I'm glad he has made that statement. The second point, it may be minor, but still, I think is the indication of our insistence, and I hope I'm reading this correctly, of April 2020. That means the Chinese going back to where they were in April 2020. And I pin a post that or position that on the reference to the dismantling of structures in North and South Pangong to or structures built since April 2020. That reference to April 2020, I think, is pertinent here, and I'm glad it has been brought in. The other factor, of course, why I said it's a temporary measure is that we have decided we will stop or remain at Dansing Tapa post near Finger 3, and the Chinese would remain at Sirijap Fort, where they have long had a post, long had a presence, but there will be a suspension of patrolling in that area. Obviously, this will be a temporary move, but I also understand that each step of this simultaneous, organized, to use their language, the Chinese language, disengagement would be subject to verification. So I think all in all, it is a first step towards diffusing the tension at the border, but I would not look at it as anything much more, because a few questions still remain unanswered, which is, what was China's agenda? Why did they do what they did? And after all, many things are unanswered, including the fact that Xi Jinping or the top Chinese leadership has not commented on this entire situation till date.
That's right. In fact, those questions will, of course, will have to be answered in due course. But this is that map for the reference of our viewers, where Sirijap is shown east of Finger 8. That's where the Chinese will go back to. And India will remain at the base of Finger 3, which is the Dansing Thapa post. And no patrolling between these two Finger 3 and Finger 8 points for the moment. There is the other important point that can be made about what happens to going back to permanent and permanent locations, peacetime locations. When will the Chinese go? One input that is there from the ground is all these steps will take 4 to 5 phases, in which each phase will be verified by either side through UAV cameras and also physically, and after that the next step will be taken. It's going to be a long haul, a very painful process, but something that is needed, given the fact that in the past, especially in June 2020, after agreeing to disengagement, the Galwan clash happened. But I'll come back to you, Mr. Ranade. Let us hear what Defense Minister Rajnath Singh also said about the disengagement during his speech. We'll play out some of the bites that have been culled out by our production team there. Can we have the
पैंगोंग लेक के नॉर्थ एवं साउथ बैंक पर डिसएंगेजमेंट का समझौता हो गया है, और इस बात पर भी सभापति महोदय इस बात पर भी सहमत हो गई है कि पैंगोंग लेक से पूर्व पैंगोंग लेक से पूर्ण डिसएंगेजमेंट के 48 आवर्स के अंदर सीनियर कमांडर स्तर की बातचीत हो तथा बाकी बचे हुए मुद्दों पर भी हल निकाला जाए। सभापति महोदय, पैंगोंग लेक एरिया में चीन के साथ डिसएंगेजमेंट का जो समझौता हुआ है, उसके अनुसार दोनों पक्ष फॉरवर्ड डिप्लॉयमेंट को फेज्ड, कोऑर्डिनेटेड एंड वेरीफाइड मैनर में हटाएंगे। चीन अपनी सेना की टुकड़ियों को नॉर्थ बैंक में फिंगर 8 के पूरब की दिशा की तरफ रखेगा, और इसी तरह भारत भी अपनी सेना की टुकड़ियों को फिंगर 3 के पास अपने परमानेंट बेस धनसिंह थापा पोस्ट पर रखेगा। इसी तरह की कार्रवाई साउथ बैंक एरिया में भी दोनों पक्षों द्वारा की जाएगी। ये कदम आपसी समझौते के तहत बढ़ाए जाएंगे तथा जो भी निर्माण आदि दोनों पक्षों द्वारा अप्रैल 2020 से नॉर्थ एंड साउथ बैंक पर किया गया है, उन्हें हटा दिया जाएगा और पुरानी स्थिति कायम कर दी जाएगी। सभापति महोदय, यह भी तय हुआ है कि दोनों पक्ष नॉर्थ बैंक पर अपनी सेना की गतिविधियां, जिसमें परंपरागत स्थानों की पेट्रोलिंग भी सम्मिलित है, को अस्थायी रूप से स्थगित रखेंगे। पेट्रोलिंग तभी शुरू की जाएगी जब सेना एवं राजनयिक स्तर पर यानी डिप्लोमेटिक लेवल पर आगे बातचीत करके समझौता बनेगा। इस समझौते पर कार्रवाई कल से नॉर्थ एंड साउथ बैंक पर प्रारंभ हो गई है। यह उम्मीद है इसके द्वारा पिछले साल के गतिरोध से पहले जैसी स्थिति बहाल हो जाएगी।
So those important points reiterated, status quo ante before April 2020 will be restored. The structures will be demolished and restored, whatever structures on both sides. No patrolling until a military and a diplomatic solution is found between finger 3 and finger 8. And also, of course, talking about other points to be taken up after the first phase of disengagement takes place or is completed, where the commanders will meet 48 hours after the first phase of disengagement is completed. So very important points there. But coming back to your point, and which some of our viewers are also asking, what about Depsang, Galwan areas? Does eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation continue? Mandar Karnik is asking. Won't separate deals for each place leave us at a disadvantage? Your comments. Maybe you want to take up this answer, and I think partly it's been answered by the Defence Minister that the discussions on other points will begin. But still, your views on this?
As I said at the outset, that this is a temporary move or temporary agreement intended to diffuse the tensions that exist at certain locations along the LAC. But if we look at Defence Minister Rajnath Singh's statement in Parliament, it is a comprehensive statement, and I think it is an encouraging statement because it does reiterate India's position. As far as the other points of friction are concerned, as has been stated, they will be taken up separately. I think it doesn't matter if they are taken up in bits and pieces, as long as we ensure that we don't yield on matters of sovereignty and territorial integrity, which again, Rajnath Singh has clarified in his statements. But let me also mention here, and I think it is important to mention here, in continuation of the points that I mentioned earlier, which still remain unanswered, the questions that remain unanswered, as long as the Chinese do not go back to their April 2020 position, which has been our insistence, till that time, we will remain under sustained pressure from the Chinese. That is something we must keep in mind. And we have said we are going to be prepared for it. That resolve should remain, because that is important.
I think you have a very important point that we cannot really trust the Chinese because of their past performance and record. And as many of our readers and viewers are talking about, somebody is saying China will move forward, and somehow we'll come to that discussion in a while. But also let me reiterate, our sort of recap rather, the events since May 2020, when the standoff really began and the crisis really began. If you can have that set of graphics, if our production team can bring it up, I think we need to also sort of go back and look at how things panned out since May 2020 and the kind of landmarks that have occurred in these last 10 months. If our production team can bring up the second set of graphics there. So it began, as we know, on May 4th, 5th, when there was a clash at Pangong Lake. There was a jostling even in Nakula in Sikkim in May 2020. Then, of course, the extensive deployment which was noticed, and then India responded and did a mirror deployment with tanks and artillery guns at that point in time. But going forward, there were other landmarks, as we know. There was the Galwan clash, unprecedented on the China border with India. Between India and China, there was no loss of life after 1975. But 15 June 2020 saw 20 Indian soldiers killed in action. Unspecified numbers of PLA soldiers were killed. Some figures put it at 35, some figures at 45 Chinese soldiers killed. But nevertheless, that spurred the Indian government to go into action against Chinese economic interests by banning Chinese apps, by doing more scrutiny of Chinese investment in Indian entities. And then India did one counter operation on 29th and 30th of August, where the Chushul Heights, Rizangla, Richinla, Mukpari, all those areas were occupied by Indian forces, which gave a tactical advantage and some leverage to India. Then, of course, as Rajnath Singh mentioned, he and Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, met their counterparts in Moscow. Then the ninth rounds of talks between corps commanders took place. A military stalemate and the harsh climate perhaps has forced both sides now to continue talking. And after the ninth round, this is what has emerged. So the point here is that while this is a good beginning, as Mr. Ranade mentioned, and I think everyone else will agree, we'll have to be wary about what are the Chinese designs in the summer. So going forward, Mr. Ranade, what would be your guess, the best guess about what the Chinese may intend to do? And as you said, until they go back to their permanent locations, we cannot be letting our guard down.
Quite true, Nitin. Not only can we not let our guard down, we will also remain under pressure because they have massed their troops there. I would also like to refer, before I get into responding to your question, to a query raised by Major General Kocher on your show, who said we are discussing Pangong Lake, which is good, but there are other tension points also, like in Galwan, Depsang, etc. And in Pangong Lake, we are at an advantage. So what he's implying is that actually we are discussing and negotiating, and I am introducing the word away, negotiating away an area where we are at an advantage. Here I would only like to mention, and I hope I'm correct on this, that it is the army commanders who are actually leading the discussions on the ground. Whereas there may be the strategic overview that we want peace, we want to get both sides to disengage, but on the ground it is the military commanders who are discussing it. So if I presume our commanders have factored this in, they should have factored this in to this. The second point I will make is I quite agree, and I think it is valid, the general sentiment in India that the Chinese cannot be trusted. They have shown it repeatedly, and I think even now, when summer comes, and the weather improves, what the Chinese have up their sleeves is something we will need to be watchful for. As far as the what the immediate concern of the Chinese would be Losar, the Chinese New Year, where everyone wants to go back, and I suppose they want to give their troops a bit of a break. But that by itself would not be a factor for this disengagement. So there may be something else. The Chinese certainly would have planned this. After all, they've had enough time. But let us look at it from our point of view. I feel that this disengagement and the feeling, and I underline feeling, of thaw, or shall I say thin feeling of a thaw, gives us an opportunity, and our military commanders an opportunity to start thinking of what next they need to do. And here they need to start looking at the entire stretch of the 4,057 kilometer line of actual control and start thinking of how we can compel the Chinese to react rather than only us reacting. I think that is where the mettle of our commanders will really come into play.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, I think what the military planners will have to factor in is the other sectors that we discussed about a week ago. What will happen in other sectors like eastern sector, both Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh, and maybe in the central sector, which is traditionally been India's weak point. Nevertheless, let's look at what Rajnath Singh also talked about in his speech about no real loss. We have not lost anything. We have gained something, is what he said. So let's hear him and then carry the discussion forward. If you can have that bite of Rajnath Singh, which our production team has spelled out.
मैं इस सदन को आश्वस्त करना चाहता हूं कि इस बातचीत में हमने कुछ भी खोया नहीं है, सभापति महोदय। सदन को यह भी जानकारी देना चाहता हूं, अभी भी यलेची पर डिप्लॉयमेंट तथा पेट्रोलिंग के बारे में कुछ आउटस्टैंडिंग इश्यूज बचे हुए हैं। इन पर हमारा ध्यान आगे की बातचीत में रहेगा। दोनों पक्ष इस बात पर सहमत हैं कि बाइलेटरल एग्रीमेंट्स तथा प्रोटोकॉल के तहत पूर्ण डिसएंगेजमेंट जल्द से जल्द कर लिया जाए। अब तक की बातचीत के बाद चीन भी देश की संप्रभुता की रक्षा के हमारे संकल्प से पूरी तरह और अच्छी तरह अवगत है। हमारी यह भी अपेक्षा है कि चीन द्वारा हमारे साथ मिलकर बचे हुए मुद्दों को हल करने का पूरी गंभीरता के साथ प्रयास किया जाएगा।
See, there you are. He's talking about outstanding issues. So, even the government of India clearly, after discussions and after verification, is aware, and I'm sure so are the military commanders, that not everything has been solved and it cannot be solved overnight. So, therefore, they're talking about outstanding issues remaining. But he also speaks about what you spoke about, India's resolve, which was very evident in these 10 months. Has probably also forced the Chinese to discuss and take the negotiations forward on other friction points like Depsang, maybe Gogra, maybe hot springs, all those areas. And I think this is one of those rare occasions when both sides are now talking about discussing the friction points further, because otherwise in the past the Chinese have just refused to accept the point of view that India had put forward. Your views?
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, I think the fact that we have resisted this sustained pressure and thereby maybe not entirely frustrated, but certainly put a pause on Chinese planning and Chinese strategies has had an effect. But I would also say that Mr. Rajnath Singh's statement, as I said earlier, a reassuring statement, a comprehensive statement, he also addresses what could be niggling questions in the minds of many people here, which is about the patrolling, which you also referred to, between finger 3 and finger 8 by both sides. And he has made it clear that this is a very temporary step and things will be resolved in due course of time. He has also emphasized that we are not lost and we will not lose even an inch of territory. So I think what he's saying is that, you know, the initial suspicion or the initial worry that we are not going to be able to patrol that area any longer, he has sought to dispel. So I think let us wait and see. That's all I can say. These are very, very tentative first steps. We will have to see how we move further. But the bottom line should be that we cannot trust the Chinese. We should not trust the Chinese, and we need to monitor every claimed withdrawal by them so that we finally push them back to where they were. Meanwhile, we are under pressure. We'll have to keep facing that up, but we will have to, as I said, start thinking of other places and other areas where we can make them come under pressure.
In fact, that's the question Devendra Panchkoti is posing, or at least an opinion, where he says, why can't we be aggressors sometimes taking back what is rightfully ours? So that I think would be a strategy that would be factored in the future planning. And of course, there is the maritime domain that we can think of going forward. As we speak, the theatre level operational readiness exercise of the Indian Navy is on either side of India's coasts. And that should send some message, given that, in the past 3 months or so, 600 units of the Indian Navy have been exercising across the coastline. So the Chinese would be watching, I'm sure, what they want to do with India. Yes, I wanted your comment on that.
I just wanted to make one point that if I compare Defense Minister Rajnath Singh's statement in Parliament and what the Chinese have put out, his statement is lengthy and is comprehensive. But I'm glad to note that in the opening paragraphs of his statement, he puts out the territories, Indian territories that are in China's possession, making it very clear that we have not given up our claim on these territories and getting them back. So I think normally we have been very sort of cautious and hesitant, and I'm glad to see that hesitancy has been dropped.
In fact, that statement I would like to read for our benefit of our viewers in a quick statement. I mean, quick point that I want to make. What he said. Basically, he referred to the Aksai Chin and Arunachal being occupied by the Chinese since 1962. He says, if I get that statement in a moment's time, I'll just read out to you.
Point three.
Point 3 in his long statement, which was read out in the parliament, which is just, I'm coming to that. Yes. He talks about, let me briefly, and I quote Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, let me briefly recapitulate the main aspects of the situation on the ground. As the House is aware, China illegally occupied approximately 38,000 square kilometers in the Union Territory of Ladakh, mainly during the 1962 conflict, which is the Aksai Chin area. In addition, under the so-called Sino-Pakistan Boundary Agreement of 1963, Pakistan illegally ceded 5,180 square kilometers of Indian territory in Pakistan occupied Kashmir to China. China thus is an illegal occupation. It's an important statement. Thus is an illegal occupation of more than 43,000 square kilometers of Indian territory. This is only in Ladakh. Then he says, China also claims approximately 90,000 square kilometers of Indian territory in the eastern sector of the India-China boundary in Arunachal Pradesh, what they call South Tibet. India has never accepted this illegal occupation of our territory or the unjustified claims. I think this is the statement that you are referring to.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's encouraging that we have put it right there that, you are in illegal occupation of so much territory of ours, and spelt out what the territories are. Of course, if I speculate a little bit, I would say that this is also an implicit pointer to the CPEC and the close ties that China has with Pakistan. But I'm here now just poking the tiger.
No. In fact, to sort of highlight the Pakistani act of giving away 5,000 square kilometers of what India considers India's territory has not been spoken enough in the context of the bilateral discussions with China. So I think you rightly sort of highlighted that. And the final point I want to make before I sort of close with another remark by Defense Minister Rajnath Singh is this: that the point that you made in the early part of this program about India stating up front that boundary and other aspects of our relationship with China are interlinked, which is what China does not want. And I just want your quick comment on that this approach perhaps is something that the Chinese never expected us to continuously harp upon.
Absolutely. Till now, we have always sought compromise. We have always been willing to yield ground for a compromise. I think this time we've stood firm. And the second thing, which I would venture to suggest, and I hope I'm correct, is that it also points to the fact that we will continue with our policy of Atmanirbhar and also reducing the areas where we have a single source of supply in vital sectors. I think that will continue, and that is important.
That's true. So on that note, I must thank you for joining in at such a short notice, but always important to get your views, which are not only balanced but also very insightful. But before I close, I must thank all our viewers who have joined us on a working day before lunch and have participated in the discussions by posing some very important questions. But this is what Defense Minister Rajnath Singh finally said in his statement and remarks in the parliament, which was the correct thing to do. Although China announced the withdrawal on Wednesday, I think the government has stuck to what is the correct approach of first informing the parliament when it is in session. So let's hear the final point of remarks.
आश्वस्त हूं कि यह पूरा सदन, चाहे कोई किसी भी दल का क्यों न हो, देश की संप्रभुता, एकता और अखंडता और सुरक्षा के प्रश्न पर एक साथ खड़ा है और एक स्वर से समर्थन करता है कि यह संदेश केवल भारत की सीमा तक ही सीमित नहीं रहेगा, बल्कि पूरे विश्व को जाएगा। सभापति महोदय, यह बात मैं विश्वास के साथ कह सकता हूं। धन्यवाद सभापति महोदय। जय हिंद।
Very important point about unity in parliament and unity amongst the Indians while it comes to taking on the Chinese. So on that note, let me end and keep subscribing to our YouTube channel, keep liking us on our social media platforms. And of course, Keep watching StratNews Global. I am Nitin Gokhale, and with me was Jayadeva Ranade, acknowledged China expert, one of the foremost in India and in Asia. Thank you very much for joining, and maybe we'll do something more in the evening if there is some other development that we come to know. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.